Timing. How many minutes?
As long as you feel it takes to say the important things. I know you don't get hung up on trivia.
At the same time, you need some details to fill out the picture.
20 minutes?
Too long. Maybe 10, 15.
Okay. As you wish. Chair. Are we ready to go?
We are rolling.
Okay, then introduce yourself again.
My name is Manuel Duran. I was born in Spain in 1925. That makes me 79 years old. Last night, my son Philip had a special treat for me. He gave me a candy, very sweet and really wonderful, that I used to love as a child. Suddenly, it brought back memories, and I spent part of the night thinking about my childhood in Spain, and also the Civil War that made my family and myself go first to France, then to Mexico, finally the United States, where I've lived for many, many years. I now think of a movie by Marlon Brando, On the Waterfront. He says, I could have been a contender. Well, I say now, I am still a contender. And we're all contenders one way or another. We all try to find some meaning to our life. I also think that maybe when we are born, many things are decided for us. We are receiving the pieces of a puzzle. We're going to spend a whole lifetime assembling this puzzle. When we think that we have finished, suddenly other pieces come. They have to be adjusted, changed, moved. Finally, a pattern emerges. And when we think that really this is the pattern, suddenly other pieces come. And we have to reassemble again. Perhaps when I think about my childhood, I tend to idealize it. It's not a bad thing, but even when everything is bright, there are some shadows, and they have to be included in the picture. Otherwise, the picture is simply too bland. And life is not bland. Life can be very tough and bitter sometimes. However, from an objective viewpoint, I had a very happy childhood. I remember there were 3 generations living together. My grandparents, my parents, and myself, my brother, and my sister. This was a middle-class Spanish family in Catalonia, in Barcelona. We always had books and art reproductions and music, and we had lively conversations at the table where my father would discuss almost anything, and we would listen in awe and then answer and maybe sometimes disagree. But on the whole, we didn't disagree. There was, on the whole, more harmony than not. I remember a beautiful city by the sea with a gorgeous Gothic cathedral and a new cathedral designed by the great architect Gaudí. It is still unfinished, like so many things, like my own life. We're still building it block by block. Someday it will be finished and the cathedral will be there, but we will have disappeared. In any case, I remember many happy hours at home and in the streets of Barcelona, or visiting the port and looking looking at ships from so many different countries coming and going. There was always a bustle in the streets, many people walking around, yellow street cars, cars of all kinds. It was like a carnival moving around all day long and parts of the night. There was also a beautiful opera theater. There were many schools. I went to a private school. We were, on the whole, privileged. We didn't appreciate it until we lost it. But we were, the family was prospering. My father was a lawyer that was becoming prominent and would become the Attorney General for Catalonia. All of this as a background. I remember also the lights of fountains illuminated at night in the Barcelona exposition of 1929. It was a moment of glory for the city. But at that moment, the crash in Wall Street was beginning, which would bring unemployment to millions, both in the United States and in Europe. All of this meant that the period of the 30s was also beginning, the rise of Hitler, and finally the rise of Franco in Spain and the war in 1939. Obviously, there were also moments of anger, of distress, of sadness, but on the whole, my life was happier than anybody had the right to expect. Sometimes, of course, there was rivalry with siblings. Sometimes there were fears of the unknown. When I was 4 years old, I was seriously ill. I had diphtheria. I had the clear feeling that I was dying and that nobody could help. Finally, I came out of it, but they thought that my toys could be contagious, and they burned my toys. That was a moment of crisis in my life, where I understood that things don't last, and that finally there are ashes and fire all over the place. However, most of my recollections were pleasant. I remember parties, I remember celebrations like Christmas and the New Year's, and the toys that appeared magically when on the 6th of January, the celebration had to do with the kings of Orient bringing gifts to everybody. Suddenly, this world was shattered by the Civil War. There was an explosion of anger, a political clash, a military rebellion, fighting in the streets. I remember looking from a balcony and seeing people shooting each other in the streets, dead bodies in the middle of the street, fires here and there, and the war was just beginning. The war meant a tension, an unbearable tension, because our side was losing, because there was nothing to eat, and because we understood that a whole way of life was coming to an end. After that, it was the flight to France, and there the war was, the general war, the war of 1939, was just going to begin. So, in France, we had to readjust everything, to adapt to a new way of life, without money, without jobs. learning a foreign language, going to a school where everything was different, and finally the idea that even this precarious world was going to end because Hitler's soldiers would be everywhere. So we decided we had to escape once more. I was the only one who had transportation because I had a bicycle. I went down to the coast looking for fishermen that had a boat that could take us to North Africa. I was supposed to go to bars to look for them, but they wouldn't serve me. Finally, I found somebody who promised if we gave him all the money we had, and we were going to pawn, my mother was going to pawn her jewels and gather the money. Luckily, we found passage on a French ship that took us to Casablanca. Ingrid Bergman hadn't arrived yet. There we were put in a sort of concentration camp while we found another ship. This one was a Portuguese ship that went from Casablanca to Veracruz in Mexico. The trip was so long because the boat was decrepit and the engine sometimes wouldn't work. A German submarine was traveling with us because somehow this gave it protection. Finally, some planes discovered the submarine and started throwing depth charges, and the war erupted all around us once more. When we reached Veracruz, we were once more in a different country with different customs. Even the Spanish language was not exactly the same. And again, we had to earn a living. My father, as a lawyer, couldn't find